I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes into the Father except by me. John 14:6. A lot of people use this verse as a proof text against universalism, but this is only used as a proof text because a lot of people are conflating universalism with another idea. This idea is pluralism, and there is a massive difference between pluralism and universalism, especially the traditional meaning of the term universalism. So pluralism is the belief that all religions lead to God or heaven or whatever thing they're saying it all leads to, but it's pretty much the belief that all religions, or at least all the major religions, are like roads going up a mountain, and of course they all eventually lead to the same place. That is pluralism. Pretty much your standard, typical pluralist, and a lot of people today are pluralists, more or less, will tell you that all the religions are pretty much the same. They all pretty much lead to the same place, and they all pretty much teach the same message of be a good person. And really all good people, regardless of what religion or even if they believe in God, as long as they're good, quote unquote, will make it to heaven. And that's pretty much becoming increasingly mainstream. That's what a lot of people believe. That is pluralism. Universalism, and what traditionally is meant by the term, back when the term was coined back in the 17th century, a universalist is someone who believes in universal salvation, especially a Christian. Now, that's what the term originally meant. A Christian who believes in universal salvation. It comes from the term universal salvation. Of course, if you say, I'm a believer in universal salvation, you say, I'm a universalist. That's what is meant by the term universalism. And that's what the term has traditionally meant. Now, there has been an attempt by liberals, Unitarians particularly, to steal the word universalism from Christians and to make it mean all kinds of things. But even if you're talking about modern, like just watered down Unitarian Universalism, you still had to believe in the universal salvation of all mankind. And most pluralists today do not believe in universal salvation. There is some overlap. There are people who are pluralists and do believe in universal salvation. That's your average Unitarian Universalist. But a lot of people who are pluralists do not believe in universal salvation. They believe that all the bad people don't make it to heaven. So, I mean, Hitler and Charles Manson and Stalin, they're not going to make it. So, I mean, that's not a universalist. I've heard people say that people who believe that pretty much everybody's going to heaven except for a few bad eggs are universalists. That's a complete contradiction of terms. Universalism means universal salvation. If you believe that one person is not saved, you're not a universalist. Simple as that. And there are, of course, a lot of pluralists, etc., who do not believe in universal salvation. Or there are a lot of pluralists who believe in reincarnation, which, of course, excludes the belief in heaven, which is kind of working against universalism as well. So there is a difference between pluralism and universalism. As I said before, classically what universalism means is a Christian who believes in universal salvation. Inside the 20th century, that term was taken from us by the Unitarians in the making of that unholy abomination we call the Unitarian Universalist Association. Pretty much what happened is that inside the late 19th century, every major denomination in America began to be influenced by theological liberalism, which diminished the authority of the Bible and started teaching that things like the virgin birth or the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen. They're all metaphors. And the Bible is just a book of man, not a book of God. And, discrediting the ideas of miracles. And the idea at the time was pretty much the purpose of religion is to make us better people. Like every Christian denomination in America, these liberal ideas began to work their way into the Universalist Church. And the liberals wanted to take over the Universalist Church because they liked the name. They liked that word, universalism. The term, of course, traditionally meant a Christian who believes in universal salvation. But the liberals love that word because, universalism, it can be whatever you want. It's such a big word. And that's what the liberals particularly targeted our denomination. And, they worked their way in slowly but surely. There are stories of, it was definitely a top-down move. There are stories of good, faithful Christian Universalist people just slowly having it all taken away from them. The ministers will come in and they'll stop doing baptism, they'll stop doing communion, they'll stop reading the Bible in church, and they'll take away the reading of the Winchester Profession, which is the document that traditional Universalism is based off the Winchester Profession, which affirms the authority of the Bible, the lordship of Jesus Christ, monotheism, and the belief in universal salvation, which are all things that actually most Unitarian Universalists, deny now. And they started to replace it with, of course, Unitarian Universalism. But eventually kind of what really did it in is that the Universalist Church was still even then a somewhat Christian denomination with some more liberal aspects to it. But what really did them in is that they merged with the Unitarians under the guise that it would be a Christian merger, an ecumenical merger amongst Christian denominations. But the Unitarians at that point had left behind Christianity, and for every one Universalist inside the merger, there were 5 Unitarians. So it was just pretty much a Unitarian takeover. And there's a major difference between Unitarians and Universalists, a few, but there was a quote from the 19th century that I think summarized it the best, where a minister said, he said that the Universalists believe God is too good to damn us forever, and the Unitarians believe that we're too good to damn forever. That may sound like a small difference, but it's actually huge. That's meaning for the Universalists that we believe that God is the one who saves us. In the cross of Christ, we are saved by God's grace. We agree with mainstream Christians that humanity cannot save themselves. We had to be saved by God's grace. We are saved by the grace of God, the cross of Christ. Man is sinful. There's no such thing as a good person except for Christ and Christ alone. All men are sinful, and we had to be saved by the grace of God in the cross. I'm reminded what 1 John tells us. We love him because he first loved us, and we agree with that, and we even take it even further. When we start to realize that we are only saved by God's grace, who are we to say that only a fraction of humanity will be saved? And we see throughout the Bible. And if you want biblical reasons, this is not just emotion or philosophy. I have biblical reasons why I believe what I believe. But we believe that eventually all mankind will be saved through the cross of Christ. Because if you really are saved by the cross alone, we do believe you had to have faith. But, if you're ultimately saved by God's grace, even you coming to faith is an act of grace. We really just it really just makes most sense if you're saved by grace that eventually all of humanity will be saved, because if we're all sinners, who are we to brag, or who are we to say, God, how dare you save everyone, if we ourselves were saved by grace and grace alone? And that's the major difference between pluralism and universalism. Pluralism teaches all the religions lead to the same place. Universalism, traditional universalism, and what is commonly still meant by the term today, believes that it's only through the cross of Christ and by grace alone that all of humanity will be saved. And that's the difference. Now, different universalists have different views of other religions. I'd be lying if I didn't say that was true. There are some Christian universalists who are a lot more on the pluralist side. For me personally, I just don't know. Romans tells us that, the law of God is written on their hearts, and I believe God is very merciful. I think it is possible that perhaps Christ reveals himself to people who are ready on their deathbeds. God is very merciful and very graceful, but we just don't know because, they've never heard the gospel. But I'm a believer very strongly in God's grace. So I do think that probably some of them are saved, but I still think we should evangelize anyways. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. I think God is merciful. God is filled with grace, and he will try his best to save everyone. So I do think probably some people that have never heard the gospel will be going to heaven by coming to faith in Christ somehow, but I couldn't exactly tell you how that works, and I can't exactly bet on anything, so we definitely should evangelize. But most universalists today are kind of admitting that perhaps Christ might work in some way through the other religions of the world, but you should still be a Christian, which is the purest revelation of God to man. That's kind of my thoughts on it. So, yeah, there is a major difference between pluralism and universalism. Thank you all for watching, and Christ will conquer.